All right, I'd like to call this meeting of the Addison Central School District to order. Today, February 13th, here we are at Mom's. Excited to be here for the first time in a long time. It is 5:33. As with all our meetings, we're going to start with some introductions. We start with you down there, Dr. Malcolm.
Chip Malcolm. Steve Orzak.
Mary Gill.
Mary Heather Miller. Jan Cedar. Sam Buck.
Victoria Jetty.
Peter Burrow, Superintendent.
Barbara Wilson.
Joanna Doria.
Ellen Wheeling-Weist.
Ryan Bauer.
Jamie McCallum.
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Nicole Carter, Director, Equity and Student Services.
Caitlin Steele, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning.
Heather Crowley, Executive Assistant to Superintendent.
Mike Dudek, co-principal at Moms.
And Miguel Wiggle, Co-Principal at Moms.
Great. Will, at this time, if you could let us know who's joining us via Zoom.
Sure. We have Chris Kramer, Emily Blistein, Matthew Correnti, Ruth Bernstein, Steve Zwicky, Tim O'Leary, and WCAX.
A different pair.
Is Lindsay on?
Lindsay is not in either
Okay,
space.
okay, great, thank you for checking. As always, this is our moment to invite public comment. If you're interested in making a public comment, please raise your hand. If you're online and wishing to make a public comment, please raise your Zoom hand. We've got a full docket tonight, so we're going to keep to our 3 minutes. So if you're in the room and you're interested in making a public comment, we'll start here and then we'll go to Zoom.
I'd like to make one. I would like to know who ACSD's behavior specialist is to start with.
Can you please state your name?
Sure, it's Rebecca Kerr.
So, public comment isn't a back and forth.
Okay, so my public comment is that my child is not receiving their academic, their academic plan that they should due to the school not providing adequate support and services to make my child successful. And I have 2 children that are actually in that category.
Thank you. We've got your name. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the room interested in making a public comment? Seeing none, we'll go to Zoom. Nobody on Zoom. Excellent. With that, can I have a recommendation to approve the minutes of January 23rd, January 26th, and January 3rd? Second? Thank you. Any questions, comments, considerations of the minutes of those 3 weeks? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I wasn't at one of them, so I was not doing them all together. I would abstain from one.
You know that.
I need to abstain from 1:30.
Thank you. All right, I'm on to the bills.
There are 2 sets of, 2 times we read bills, once on the 30th of January. There are a number of warrants, payroll warrants. First one for $3,951.46. Second one for $865,012.04. Third one for $736.67. The general fund from the reading on the 30th was a fairly large number, $1,361,204.71. I often do, a lot of that number was related to teacher retirement, about $400,000, health and dental, which was close to $500,000. So a lot of that big total was related to those payments, which I guess we come due on a regular basis. Second set of bills were read today on the 13th, again by Barbara and myself. The first one was the general account of $273,383.51. And the second one was the payroll warrant, which was for $868,277.60. No addition to the bills, and make a motion to be accepted and paid.
And I'll second that. Any questions or comments for the finance committee?
I have one comment to make that it's not on the agenda, but it has to do with finance. The finance committee, Barbara, Steve, and myself met with Matt Correnti last week to look at the second quarter report, which we did, and it's all in good stead. We made some recommendations as to trying to bring out a little bit some of the numbers, especially under unspent monies in the budget that would be related mostly to direct education. Most of that coming from the fact that we could not hire people to fill those positions. So that was basically where we were.
And I would like to, the discussion centered around a $3 million overage is a good thing that we did not, we have not, we've spent less than we thought we were going to spend. However, it is in personnel, and that looks like it's going to continue the rest of the year. So what's going to happen at the end of the year is we're going to have this overage in that particular category, but we will not have had the staff to carry out their educational, basically what their charge is. One idea that was discussed at that time is there a way to take that money, and a little bit of that money, not all $3 million of it, and use it to do some special recruiting, perhaps out of state, perhaps to have something that we can work with the association about, maybe paying travel expenses or something of that nature. It really is silly to have $3 million sitting out there and not use that to get the personnel that we need in this district. And I understand hiring is tight. It's tight everywhere. And we're not in any better shape than the surrounding districts. Maybe it's time to move out of this pool and maybe try to do something, a little further afield. Do some recruiting outside of our normal catchment and outside of schools, things like that. And it was not go do this, but it's like, could we possibly talk about freeing up some money and ask Dr. Burrows and the staff to maybe think a little bit about recruiting outside of school spring. And if it takes some money to do it, we got $3 million.
Just wanted to comment that $3 million, when it runs over the year, that would not be what our extra would be, because it's balanced off by many other things, okay? So Steve is right, we had a fairly good discussion, and Matt took a lot of notes, so we can address that maybe at some point. Whether it's fruitful or not, we don't know, but there was an issue there.
And just to kind of add on that, thank you, Steve. And the one, when talking about it, one of the concerns I always have is what's been the downside of that, from a student outcome perspective, and do we have to use some of that money to do something over the summer or whatever? And maybe in Kevin, but it would be interesting to hear what that impact might be. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion on the table to pay the bills. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Bills will be paid. And now, without further ado, and the most exciting part of our whole evening, we're excited to be here and to hear from you. Who am I handing it off? I'm going to start
we could go on and on and on about the amazing things that students are doing at MUMS this year. But we don't have all day. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Young here in just a second and introduce our jazz band, who are all amazing individual musicians and are incredible together as a band. We have the luxury of hearing them very, very early in the morning before school starts. They're committed to their craft. And without further ado.
Yeah. Very excited. I'll just kind of go off that. I mean, incredible group of musicians. They come here every single, we do 3 days a week, meeting in the morning. They come ready, they're excited to play. We've got like 5 people that just made it into districts, which was just incredible, and that happened without further ado, we're going to do this first tune. This is called Strasbourg Saint Denis.
So we have one more quick presentation for you. We're going to switch sides, literally going to the opposite side of the cafeteria. We have a group, it's our student ambassadors. These are students that want to take the lead in the building, that want to extend on voice, take on various events and activities. Right now, their focus this week has been on Winter Carnival. So they've been doing a bunch of spirit events and spirit activities. Tomorrow, students will be guessing who the baby pictures are, and they're all pictures of staff members. So that'll be super cute, super awesome to see. So we'll see how many of them guess us as little babies. It's not a, we don't have any students here today. It's difficult to get them here, but they created a wonderful video that they wanted to showcase. It's about 4 minutes, but they've really taken on this challenge. What's been neat about this year is that all the students that wanted to participate in Student Ambassadors have that right and opportunity to do that. There was no voting process. There was no coming out and trying to sort of win a position or a placement on the activity or the group. So we have a really diverse and large group of student ambassadors. So with that, Will, you got it. Thanks.
Student ambassadors to make an impact in my school. Ambassadors impacts our community because it puts in a student voice for other kids. I think student ambassadors impact the school by raising awareness to people who don't have the same stuff as we do. We get students involved in service. Ambassadors help the school because we help raise school spirit. up our school and students in positive ways.
Again, I just wanted to add that, I don't think I mentioned, but Elizabeth Burrows is one of our counselors, and Darcy Lysenbeek lead the student ambassadors and do a great job. Students created the video, the staff created, along with their staff members to give you a little snippet of what they do. Hopefully you got a little bit of that. So I think on behalf of Mrs. Wizzle and myself, thanks for coming to Moms. Glad to have you here and host you here. And we appreciate everything that the community does to support our students and our staff. Thanks.
Thank you. I can speak to some of it, and I think Mike can speak to some of it. I would say our thinking about what this about what we hoped for this year really began over the summer. We had a couple working groups that focused on climate and culture, and also like discipline and what that would look like here, what we wanted and hoped for that to look like here at Moms. And another big change that occurred pre that, which Mike can probably talk more about than I can, was our thinking about our teaming structure and a focus on ensuring that our teams were smaller so we could prioritize relationships, and students felt more connected to their team and teachers felt more connected to students. And a lot of that work happened in the spring and was ready for the start of the school year. Another thing that I think we had the benefit of having this year was the ability to have our community in our school, and thank you. Don't let me forget to plug that in.
I'll remember.
We'll hear about it tomorrow.
In a way that we could celebrate all the things that kids are doing that was really hard to celebrate and acknowledge in years past due to COVID. So ensuring that we had, dances and the fun run, activity nights, our concerts, our arts and design expo, and all of those things that fill a school and a community with joy that we weren't really able to enjoy over the last couple of years. And I think contribute to climate and culture in a really, really significant way. And it's something that our kids and our staff missed over the last couple of years. We also have a dean of climate and culture, and that really is her work. And being able to focus on that and think about that, what that means in this learning community, has been really beneficial and continues to grow.
So I would add just a little bit about just the community partnerships and the parents that are on board. We have a large group of friends of Moms that regularly meet and talk about different ways that we can provide for our students. So there's a lot of conversation about what Flex looks like, how do we go and think about social events that are happening in the building. I think Michaela really hit it on the point in terms of social activities and having folks in this building. I recall last year, the first time that we had adults in this building was in the end of November. And it was such a unique feeling to have folks in this building that weren't our staff and our students, and in fact brought a great energy. We have a variety of activities that happen, social events that happen this year that we're continuing. I think our students are really feeling like this is their building. Again, last year, we had a cohort of students that weren't familiar with the building, weren't familiar with structures and systems and staff. And I feel that that cohort of students that are here, along with our new 6th graders coming on board, but having 7th and 8th grade cohort being in this building, can really just think about and reflect on what they received last year and what they can take this year. So those are some of those elements that we've been really working on.
Thank you.
No, I was going to ask a similar thing, because we hadn't heard anything about the middle school, and we heard a lot about the middle school last year.
Right.
And we haven't heard anything recently, so I just wanted to hear what you said, and you have covered what I wanted to hear. I'm good.
If I would just follow up with what are some of the challenges that you continue to need to work on, and what are the things that are kind of rising up to the top that you feel like you need support with?
Yeah. I guess I don't want to preface this by saying that this is probably unique to moms. Like, I think these are probably things that most, if not all, middle schools in Vermont are experiencing, and maybe not just middle schools, but all schools in general. You know, there's great need for support for students, and the resources, not just resources in the context of ACSD, but resources in the context of our community to meet those needs is a continued challenge, and that's not new, but it's visible, right? And I think that there's this expectation that the pandemic is kind of over and everything just becomes typical again, and there isn't a typical, right? But the resources are more scarce, and the needs are pretty significant. So I think coming up with creative ways to support students and families and accessing resources outside of school continues to be a priority, and something that we have to think really creatively about. Before, it used to feel like there were really obvious channels. And I think thinking about moms in the context of a continuum of academic experience for our students in ACSD as they transition from elementary school to middle and then middle to high school, like we're a transitioning place. And so thinking about how we can do that in a way that feels coherent for staff and families that are experiencing it, but also for students as they transition from our elementary schools to middle and then middle to high, continues to be a priority. And it's been done differently over the last couple of years, and certainly since 6th grade's been at MUMS. And so thinking about what we've done in the past, what we've always done, how we've had to do things over the last couple of years, and how we mean to do them going forward, so it's smooth and coherent is a priority for us that we're thinking a lot about. And then in the context of ACSD in general, we're focusing on systems and how we ensure that within the context of our organization, we're supporting students across tiers as a priority. And middle school is an exciting place to be as you think about a student's experience.
Thank you. Last question. Thank you. So this is kind of following up on the financial update that we had, being that it's obvious that we have underspent in the area of teachers because we haven't been able to find those teachers, right? Are you seeing a big impact at MUMS because of the district's inability to hire?
So I would say that we have been lucky enough to be able to be, for the most part, for the year, fully staffed with our teaming and our structure so our teaming and our structure. I mean, with our need, we're always paraprofessionals. So that our one-to-one intensive needs, that's where we were looking and desperately seeking qualified adults coming in. But outside of that, we felt pretty good with again, the structure and the system that we currently have in place, that we didn't have those needs that we knew some of our other schools had. Again, paraprofessionals, that intensive needs, one-on-one support, I think that's always been, when we think about transitioning students from the elementary level to the middle school, what does that truly look like, and how are we supporting our highest needs students? That was somewhere that we put a lot of energy into, and we've been able to fill those roles.
All right, thank you so much. It does feel good being here. It was great to see you. Both ends of the room. All right, on to reported superintendent.
Great. First thing, people are asking about calendar, and we are working on finalizing our calendar for next year, so be on the lookout for that fairly soon. It's going to look mostly like this year. We are looking at moving our in October. Traditionally, we've had a day around October 13th, 14th, 15th, it's usually a Friday. We're going to be moving that to Indigenous Peoples Day. That's along with other districts throughout Chittenden County, Addison County, Franklin County as well. MUHS principal hiring process is that closed on Friday. We're putting a committee together, and we are reaching out to folks over the course of this week to start putting that together. Jay Nichols, who is the president of, or director, executive director of EPA, is going to be leading that search with the committee. So he will be communicating with the committee this week, and we'll get that off the ground and move forward. We expect the timeline to be somewhat similar to the superintendent hiring timeline, probably a little bit faster. It's been open for just a week and a half, I think, at this point, and will stay open through break into early March. So we are, again, going to be hearing back from that committee. The goal will be for that committee, and this is if you haven't looked at the request for participation, it's a representative committee, students, parents, staff, faculty, etc., and administrators as well. So that group hopefully will narrow that down to a single finalist, and that will be brought forward to me. I will then bring that finalist onto the board for final action. One thing I wanted to mention, I know we've talked about it a couple times, and as we're talking tonight about moms and individual student need, and as we look at our student services, we mentioned at the beginning of this year, I think as part of Nicole's leadership, we put together CPAC, which is a Special Ed Parent Advisory Council. We have been working, and the whole Special Ed team has been working to support that group. We are currently reviewing the steering committee bylaws for the CPAC. That process is moving along, and the basis of this work is to support both our students in the classroom and outside of the classroom, and make it as porous as possible in terms of our work alongside parents to support students. This is a model that's used in other states. I think it will probably catch on in Vermont more than it has. I think it's really important, and I think any parent who has a student who has sometimes felt alone, I think this council is really important. So I'm excited about that. Finally, I just wanted to mention, we heard the music tonight, and on Friday night in Bennington was the district's, a few of those students played, and lots of other students from the high school and the middle school choirs and band there. It was, I went down too, my children was playing, and it was awesome. We had strong representation from Middlebury, which is great.
Oh, sorry. So the CPAC, would it be possible from a board perspective to maybe get a presentation on that, or even maybe once they get their charter or whatever, have them come in and present so we can kind of understand what their role is, and because it sounds exciting, and I have definitely been hearing issues, parents' frustration, that kind of thing, and I'm wondering if this might be a resource for folks. And also, I guess, kind of following up
So, the facilities committee had a meeting, oh, I'm sorry.
Were you gonna talk about the ACP at some point, or?
That's what I was saying.
Okay.
I'm sorry, is there any other questions for Peter before we move on?
Regarding the calendar, is there any consideration to not have as many early release days? To try to consolidate that to like one day off instead of all the early release days?
So the districts talked about that. I mean, the conversation was actually, can we have more or not?
Oh,
You
God.
heard?
Seriously?
Just full disclosure.
Oh, my goodness, okay.
And I think the challenge, and that was not where we had it, and I shared some of your concern that you mentioned in terms of the challenge of those. I think if you look across at what school districts do to meet with staff and to have ongoing professional development, having single days periodically, like interspersed throughout the year, generally isn't as powerful as having consistent time to be working together, either at the building level or at the district level. And it runs smack dab into the challenges we have for families, right? In terms of before school, after school. Some school districts will do that early release, like once a week. Some will do a late start. They'll start school at 10 o'clock, for example. I think that's what CBSD is doing. That's Shelburne, Charlotte, that district. They do that every week, and they don't have any of the individual days. I think what we've talked about here is we feel, and I think we've talked about this at this level too. After school and are basically working to support families when the school schedule becomes different than the 8 to 3 schedule that we're accustomed to, that we need to work harder to figure out how to support after school and support care in some way. So that's actually where we're putting our energy. We're working to hire that after school and extra summer school and after school coordinator, which has been in ESSER. We weren't able to hire previously in the fall, that we actually have an interview slated for next week with someone. So our hope is that person, and our plan, really, it's not just a hope, but the plan is for that person to come in, start to look at who we are, what we can potentially fund, looking at the different kinds of grants that we have access to, and essentially from there, if we could sustain, for example, a care option for all students during early release, or during, if we had a consistent one, then it's a different kind of conversation. So that's kind of where we are.
And that was my follow-up question, and you answered it, so that there's some energy into having alternatives, options for families. That's good to hear, so. And the one other question I had was about the timeline for the transitions. The middle school leadership alluded to this transition from elementary to middle to high, that continuum. And what is the timeline? Are there certain things to look forward to for, I'm a 5th grader and I've heard nothing about the transition, and we're more than halfway through the school year. So what can families anticipate? Are they gonna start happening soon? Or, I also, for students who are going from middle to high, and there's a lot to learn and understanding the choices that they can make. So is there a document or some type of website, or where can families go to find out about that?
So at the middle to high transition, our 8th graders went to the Career Center a couple weeks ago and visited. MUHS counselors came here last week, 2 weeks ago, and met with all 8th graders. There was a parent night that already happened, and their course selection is underway. 5th to 6th grade, the first communication went out last week to teachers and principals at the elementary level. That's our first information gathering place. Then individual meetings happen with our counselors here and the teachers and counselors at the elementary level. And our first reach out to families about the timeline happens in the beginning of March. And from there, transition meetings that need to happen for students that are on plans begin to happen. And we scheduled our parent night where parents come here and learn about moms. And it's on the schedule, currently the 5th grade visit to moms, which is coming right up. So you'll hear directly from our counseling office, because you're a incoming, a rising 6th grade parent, in the beginning of March. But the transition internally has already begun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on, as you saw on the agenda, we've asked Nicole to come and speak a little bit about the Addison Consortium program. The Facilities Committee, I guess the last couple meetings, this sort of the need for a space for this program seems to have risen to the top in terms of priority that we're hearing from central office. And so we thought that it would be great if Nicole could come and give us a sort of introduction to the program, and then sort of launch us into an understanding of what it is, and then we'll have future discussions at meetings in the future. And there's also a tour of the high school program schedule. I think it was in the communication that Mary Heather and Suzanne sent out this past week. And I'm forgetting what day it's actually.
I was hoping you'd remember.
The 22nd. So anyone who's interested in joining in that tour, why don't you RSVP who knows who to expect. All right, on to you.
Okay, I'm setting the timer so that I only talk for 10 minutes and you have time to ask questions.
Can you speak up here?
I can speak up here. Yes. So I have a timer set for 10 minutes. Here we go. Visuals over there, voices over here. Yeah. I'll use my outside voice. So I didn't know that was going to be so far away. So I started. By trying to point out the specialized service continuum, because I think it's often a mystery if you're not working it. So on the far left is the least restrictive option for kids, and those are general education programs. And that's when students receive specialized services in the classroom, the general ed classroom, or in small groups. And it doesn't require any kind of specialized classroom or school. That's sort of the least restrictive, using the language of the law. Next is what's best referred to as a daily intermittent program. And what that means is that there are highly specialized classroom environments, but within a general ed setting. It's so hard not to put my back to someone in this. And that means that students get some services in an environment that has been supported in a very specific way, but they have access throughout the day to a general ed environment. The next one, and if you see on the bottom, we're going from least restrictive to most restrictive. Federal law says you have to do everything you can to stay least restrictive. You have to prove you're staying least restrictive, and you can get penalized for going most restrictive. But there are some students who do need more restrictive programs. And those are out-of-district programs like ACP, and these are highly specialized environments outside of a general education environment. That means everything about the environment has been designed to support students, and you actually don't have access in that environment to the general education population. Lastly, all the way to the right, the most restrictive thing that a school district can do, and it's only done in short term, and right now ACSD only does it if there's absolutely no choice because of waiting lists in the state of Vermont. So if we have a student who has a highly specialized need, and there's no place for them to go to school because everything's maxed out in the state, we will design an individual program for them that is just about that. So ACP, Addison Consortium Program, is in the out-of-district self-contained program. I put their logo right there. So it's a more restrictive self-contained program. Normally I would take questions, but I'm going to keep going, because I know you're going to have questions.
Nicole, don't step on that fence behind you.
Thank you. So here is ACP. It used to be a preschool at Vermont Sun. I bet many of you have seen the door. It now has the logo. Those are chairs that the students built. This is the staff for ACP. On the top far left is the principal, Gina Ducey. She wanted to be here tonight. She could not be here tonight because she has a cold. In addition to Gina, on the far right, there's a special educator, Rob McCune. Then two behavior interventionists, fabulous women, Amanda and Marcy. And then the bottom left is a clinical social worker, Claire. These staff, some of them work for ACSD, some of them work for the two other districts we do this with. So for instance, Gina is employed by us, but Rob is employed by Addison Northwest, because we share everything in this program. We're the only place in the state where 3 districts have come together to make things possible like this. So here is ACP. I tried to put some pictures for those of you who won't be on the tour. 8th to 12th grade alternative program, 3 school districts. We work with sending schools to make sure that what the student needs and what ACP has mix. And then the program is considered immersive because students spend half the day in the community, sometimes on a farm, sometimes building a boat, sometimes horseback riding, sometimes skiing, doing things that are directly connected to their learning. On the far right, which you can't see, and I'm so sorry about that, is the daily schedule. They arrive, they have breakfast, they depart for the day, then they come back, they have lunch, and they have their academic blocks in the afternoon. I'll keep going. My timer says 5 minutes. So here are 3 examples. This is actually taken right from their website. The beginning of this was the link to their website. On the far left, they built a boat. Amazing. Gina says if she were here, she would rave about it. It's the best thing they do because, I need a sip of water, because they build a boat from scratch and then they go out in the water and then it gets donated to the Maritime Center. In the middle is Lester Farm, where they go and they work on the farm and they learn all about marketing produce and crop selection and soil composition. And then we also have outdoor adventures because of all the evidence we have that outdoor adventures help kids and students learn. These are some pictures from their photo gallery. You can go online and see all of their pictures. They're lovely, they're amazing. Okay, so let's talk money. Here's a chart that hopefully you can see. On the far left is the thing that we pay for. So the first thing is individualized small group academic and social emotional programming per student for a 9-month school year. The middle column shows you what it costs when we send a student to a placement outside of ACP, which is what existed before ACP did. It's about $50,000 to $200,000 to educate a student outside of this program. On the far right is what it costs for a student to go to ACP, and that's $34,000. And that's just for their programming. Next is transportation. Transportation typically right now costs us between $56,000 and $120,000 for a 9-month school year. Typically students are going up to Burlington, sometimes they're going south. For ACP, the cost for transportation is $8,750. Third, yeah.
These figures that you're giving us are shared by 3 entities?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
The ones on the far right is the cost per student. Other important considerations. When we send students to out-of-district placements, it takes about 45 minutes each way for them to get to school. And we don't really have any, for lack county, and they have flexible reintegration to their home school. It's really easy when kids are transitioning back to be able to go to the high school for a couple hours and then go back to ACP or vice versa. So at the very bottom, we currently have 4 students at ACP. There's 3 school districts, they each get 4 students. The total cost for our 4 students is about $167,000. If we did not have ACP, we would still be responsible for the same level of education, and it would cost us anywhere from $400 to $1.2 million. So we're opening another school. We're going to start the ACP middle school program. 12 students, location to be determined. If you know a great place, please let me know. We're looking for real estate. The staffing model is exactly the same. We'll have a principal who we just hired, Kathy Farman, who's been a school principal for probably 10 years and has expertise with students who need extra support for social emotional learning. There'll be a clinician or a BCBA, we just posted it today, a special educator, and 2 DIs. And then on the right, I actually put in the job description just in case anybody was watching and looking for a job, or if you know somebody who's looking for a job. I think that's the last one.
Can you speak a little bit about the need for this program? And, you know, so it sounds like the high school program currently has 12 students, 4 from here. Is that adequate? And I'm assuming you're having, or I know that you're looking to do the same size at the middle level. Is that adequate? And sort of talk about the needs, and if we heard the financial piece as to if these programs did exist, but what are those students doing if they're not going here? Assuming that Burlington's full or
Yeah, so I would say, is it adequate? No. We have more students in need of a program like this than we have spaces for. There are a few schools that we've been able to get slots out of district, so that's helped. We have a couple of students that we've built programs for in district. And that's
out of the general.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not enough. It's more than we would. If we did not have this, we would be in dire straits because the waiting lists are immense around the state. But could we use more? Yeah.
So for those students who are needing services like this, don't currently access ACP, are they in general ed in our MUMS and WHS school? Well, obviously MUMS, because that wouldn't have launched yet, but, or are they currently just sitting on a wait list waiting to get, what's happening to those kids now, and how are any of their needs?
Yeah, so when a student, when the school district's on a wait list, that doesn't mean the student doesn't have anything, it just means that we're waiting. And it really depends on the student. With a couple of students, we've been able to secure placements and other out-of-district placements that are at least 45 minutes from here. And then for some students, we've built programs so that they're still in the district, but it's such a highly specialized program that it does not exist within the general education container.
So they're not in school in the general environment, they're not being homeschooled?
No, we're not being homeschooled. We've built programs for them.
What
We
do
want more
those programs
specifics.
look like?
Yeah, it depends on the student. I'm trying not to get too specific
Right,
because it's
yeah.
identifiable.
Yeah.
So it depends on the student. They have, sometimes students have extra counseling services. Sometimes students have supports from CSAC and have additional behavioral supports. Sometimes students are going to programs that are adventure-based, and they're going someplace else in Vermont. There's a range. Sometimes students are going to classic out-of-district placements like Centerpoint, which is up in Burlington. It really depends. Yeah.
So I have a clarifying question. You said that the cost to the district is $41,900, and that sounds like that's a per student basis. But you also said that a number of the staff are employed by the district. Could you tell me, is that part of the 41,000? Is it in addition to the 41,000? I'm not clear about how the funding is working here.
So the total cost per student is $41,000. So we take the total cost for the program, which is 12 students, and we split it 3 ways. So if you take that final number of 167 and multiply it by 3, anyone? That's the total cost for the program. So we bill out 2/3 of the cost of the program. So that 41 is the total cost for one student.
So that 41,000 includes the salaries for the employees that are
Yes, it includes everything.
employed by ACSD.
It includes everything. Yeah. Oh, I forget, I don't call on people, I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay, thank you.
I
Well,
didn't
first of
know.
all, thank you for this. This is great, giving this presentation. So, a couple questions kind of related to what Mary Heather had asked as well. So, in the future, would it make sense, from your perspective, to expand, to build out a larger program so that, maybe it's 24 students that's divided across, the 3 districts or whatever? Because when I look at the savings and also the travel involved and the impact on the child, it just seems like having them here, just my humble observation, would be a really good thing. So would that be something we would, really consider? Because, 4 doesn't seem like very many decibel. It really seems very low.
And those 4, not all students stay like the whole year, right? We had students just transition back after 3 or 4 months. So you could have more than 4 students in a full year. That answers your question. The real answer is sort of the answer I think is often given when talking about specialized programming, which is it depends. So the larger a program gets for students who have specialized needs, the more stigmatizing it can be, and the more difficult it can be to run, because you've now put a certain need, you've condensed the need into one location. Could there be additional programs that are just like this but are more satellite? It's hard to argue with the numbers, isn't it?
Yes.
And I didn't say this, and so so this was started before I arrived. It started in 2019, I believe. Actually, it was the year I arrived. And it was Vicki Wells, Karen Griswold, and Susan Rule and Mount Abe who did it because they couldn't argue with the numbers. So I think there is room for growth. It's also, it's a really difficult program to lift, right? So it takes, the staff are highly specialized, so it's hard to find people who have those skills. Then they need specialized supervision. Then we need understanding in the community. So there's a lot of little important things that have to come together.
And so then my follow-up question on to that is, how do you measure success? Sorry.
Oh, that's a great question. I was going to say that's a great question. I think we measure success for the students who are on IEPs. We literally measure success based on their IEP goals, which are often centered around learning to advocate for themselves, learning to use coping skills when triggered, learning to cope with frustration, learning to have multiple reciprocal relationships, and academically as well. The academics, to be frank, is just a little bit easier to define, right? Math is math, reading is reading.
Right.
Did I? Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to suggest making contact with Otter Valley. They've had an excellent program. I think the fellow's name is Josh Hart, an ex-student of mine.
Yes.
And I think some components of that fit very well.
Yes. I tried. I tried to hire him. Yes, they're actually all full. There's sometimes when we don't have enough space, we try to send kids to Otter Valley.
Right, but you can steal some of the program.
Program, staff, I take it all.
Very good.
I have a question about, before they begin to go. At the elementary school, you're already, I'm sure, seeing students who are struggling socially, emotionally, disruptive, unable to be in a classroom. What can we do to lower the need later on by working with those younger kids?
That's a great question. I'm actually going to go back to the beginning. What we're doing this year is that daily intermittent programs, we're starting to build those out in Mary Hogan, Middlebury, and UHS. So we're trying to, we actually don't want to send our kids to out-of-district programs, so we're actually starting to build programs. Mary Hogan has a new program called the Wellness and Learning Center, which is intermittent for kids to be able to go into when they're struggling, come out of when they're not struggling. So we're trying to build in-house. Someone, it wasn't tonight, at some point in the past couple of weeks, I think it was Addison Northwest, one of our partners said, let's build an elementary version. And we have not approached that yet because it's very complicated. Little kids internalize going to another school differently than middle school students. So we're trying to figure out how to get resources in the schools rather than just relying and sending kids out. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that does answer. I know similar programs have been started in the elementary school in years past, and then dissolved, or they were taken down. How is this different? Do you know? I mean, you weren't here at that time, but how are they different?
It's a great question. I don't know entirely because I wasn't here. I do know that at Mary Hogan, we had a staff meeting and invited anyone who had been there to say, like, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. And then as we're sort of continuing, it's an iterative building process. I would say that's the number one thing that keeps coming up is we did this last time and it didn't work, so let's not do that and let's do this. So
you're taking the experience of people who have been there. Thank you.
Two more questions, and then Jamie, and then Joy.
Okay. The federal law thing about restriction at the center, like, what is that? Is there another way to explain that? Like, does that mean that in the federal laws incentivize programs to do something, essentially?
Yeah.
So
what they incentivize through the legal system is that you want to show and you want to make it possible for kids to get their needs met as close to the general education environment as possible. It's an inclusive policy, right? This idea that kids who have atypical needs shouldn't have to leave their general education environment to have their needs met.
So
and that's called least restrictive.
Okay, so does that incentivize, I mean, does that incentivize unidentified needs in a way? Like, does the federal law restrict, like, sort of encourage us to say, well, this person should be on this end of the spectrum, on the scale, the least restrictive part of your scale? And does it do that? How does it function?
I don't know if I entirely understand, but I only tried answering it this way. I may not get it. What it does is it causes when a team of people come together to say, are we doing everything we can so that we're meeting this student's needs without having to exclude them? Did that?
Yeah, but I think the question is about identification. Right?
Oh, it has no relationship to identification.
It doesn't create more.
It's not even like in the
Just
same.
when a student has an advised education plan, the requirement is that the team works to have that student be in this restricted environment. It doesn't.
Yeah. They're like two totally different conversations.
Okay.
Yeah.
In anticipation of next year, ACSD's enrollment in ACP, is it coming from out-of-district placements currently, or is it coming from sort of in-house specialized programs?
That's a good question. Oh, I love when I say I don't know. We would never pull out of any program that was working. So if there's a student who it's working for, we would keep that student there. Don't know.
It's just when
It's a
you
great
see
question.
the comparisons of the savings,
Yeah.
that's where you immediately, I feel like this is designed to make that comparison, right? But
Yes, and how to say this in a way that you all want to keep me employed. It is my job to think about money and resources, but the larger part of my job is to think about making sure kids get their needs met, and so that's the first conversation. So we wouldn't pull someone away if things are working.
Thank you. Does anyone have a burning question?
Kind of, yeah. Kind of, it's burning in my mind. So we're talking about meeting the needs of these students in the least restrictive, closest to the general population. What about the general population? When you have a student that is in, like, you know, as close to possible to the general population, but their presence there is making it harder for the rest of the students in that population to get their learning needs met. So it seems like it would be a sort of a dance between the two. So when that's happening, is there a process for trying to figure out how to meet, you know, other than having like lockdown drills and clear the halls and that sort of thing? Like, how is there a parallel planning process so that the general population still gets their needs met?
Yes. But they're two different conversations. So we have a conversation about if a student is struggling such that they're impacting their peers, that team comes together and has to figure out what can they do to change what the school district is doing to support that child. Sometimes, and again, I'm working hard not to identify, so sometimes if a student's struggling and it's known that it's impacting their peers, then that principal, that teacher, and other people will come together to talk about how to support those other students. But there are two different conversations, right? One is with the team that's responsible for determining how to support the kid. The other one is with the general education principal, teacher, and staff.
And so that team may decide that that child would be better served, as would his or her classmates, if they attended a program like ACSD.
We just wouldn't make that decision based on the impact to other students. We, by law, can only look at that.
Got it.
One last question, sorry. Real quick, what's the general sort of residence time for a student in the program? Is it a whole year, is it a month, is it, I mean, I'm sure it depends.
Yeah, for ECP.
Yeah.
It definitely does depend. I would say right now, probably about a year on average, thinking of all three school districts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, this is just sort of an intro because the facilities committee felt like we were getting a lot of information about these programs and the rest of you hadn't heard of them. And so we wanted everybody to speak that part of what the facilities committee has been discussing is location for students.
should we give them a heads up that potentially if the location is identified, if the full, it would come to the full board if there were some implications with any funding that we had or potential redesignation of some of our current facilities.
Right, I think when we were talking about the budget, I think it was Barb who had asked about money that is spent on UX Cohen is looking at the central office, and that was part of this, was moving central office, being an appropriate place for middle school programs, who it was, when the central office, E-wing or 208, or, so that was, that's where this conversation started. Why are we looking at all these places? Do you have anything that administrator on that?
No, I mean, I think, you know, we're trying to be thoughtful with the facilities that we do have, and out how to make all these pieces work. I think transportation is one of the big challenges we have, so we've been able to look across our whole district and look at space. The Middlebury facilities tend to be the place where most of these programs make sense to house, just given the transportation realities. So, so that's one of the things that's putting a crunch, I think, in some ways on available space. And you all, I think, heard that a few times, like we had some people that had to move out of the high school and into the central office into the conference room for a month or two. So we've been doing a lot of musical chairs within the district to make space for some of the programming that we talked about earlier. So we'll continue to problem solve and bring back the facilities committee and more as needed and make it work. And we're still looking at rental properties and other properties around around town here too. So we're continuing to try to figure it out.
Yeah, so the facilities committee did receive an update about some of the options that they were looking at. And we kind of got a bit of this information from Nicole, because we're like, so, it seemed like we were looking at the facility, but we didn't really understand why. So we wanted you all to know about why first, and we got that clarification that it's better that it's not in the school building, because for some students that's, not a fit. And so we have the why, we wanted you all to have the why, and then when there's a little bit more sort of direction about what facility might be appropriate, that would come to you and want to be sort of ready to be able to talk about that at the time. Yeah? Because I think time might be of the essence, especially in this market, if something happens, and I know Nicole's anxious to start getting it set up.
I don't know why the prayer was concerned, but Madison Elementary School, like the first year, place educational program, and as far as I know, they're not doing anything with that building.
I think that's been, he said Addison Central School seems like it would be a good place. I think do you want to speak to?
ACP was at Addison Central School, and we left there because students engage in a lot of services in Middlebury, and so it was actually in the best interest of the students to be in Middlebury. And there's transportation already from Addison Northwest and Mount Mead into this area.
All right, so more to come on that, but remember, if you're interested in going to see the high school program at Vermont Sun, that is the all right, moving on to report of the board. As you all know, we have on our agenda to take action on the amending of Article 14. And you also all know that we received a letter from SOS via their lawyer, Nicholas Lowe. I must say the timing of it was interesting to me since they've known that this has been on the calendar for a month, and it came to us at 1 o'clock this afternoon. Feels a little bit like a delay tactic, but we were able to schedule time with Chris Leopold. So Peter, Suzanne, and Mary Heather and I had a conversation with Chris about the contents of their letter. And Chris felt that it was appropriate for us to move forward. I think that there was sort of the question that he kept coming back to and then sort of made a decision on was whether or not considering this change would undermine the argument that the authority for closing school for the rest of the board. And he felt that we were sort of safe with our argument and that we could move forward with discussion and action tonight. I don't know if Mary Heather, Suzanne, Peter, do you have anything you want to add about that discussion? And then we're going to
And then we'll go on to having ad hoc committees present the suggested language.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sorry, was that because of a feeling that moving forward would not have bearing on the content of the letter, or the issue at hand of the letter, or is it that his interpretation of the legal statutes quoted in the letter is different from the interpretation in the letter? So, does that make sense? It's like we can move forward because they're almost separate issues, or is it that he doesn't agree with the legal standing in the letter?
My understanding is that he didn't agree with the legal argument in the letter, and that our sort of legal justification for deciding not to proceed with the petition was valid.
Yep, that's my understanding as well.
You know, in reading that also, it seemed to me that obviously there's two different people that have a different opinion, okay? And the person who is bringing it, the group that's bringing it certainly, and the last part of the letter basically said, if you don't do this, the suit will be coming. Well, I guess that's what happens in conflicts that can't be resolved, and they have to go to court and have a judge or whoever decides those types of things as to what validity of each position is taken. I think our position is perfectly strong, but on the other side, I don't think it should change anything that we do tonight just by reading that letter. And I did find it a little weird to me too.
Chris Leopold also mentioned, and he did apologize when he spoke with us because he couldn't. He said he hasn't dealt with Act 153 or 156 for a while, since about 2014. But he did say that in one of those acts that at that point, with everyone consolidating and unifying, that there was a 4-year moratorium within one of those acts, I just couldn't remember which one it was, that prohibited anybody from closing schools for a period of 4 years. And he said that that piece is gone and it no longer exists anywhere in the state statute. And then he also went on to say the legal authority within statute of what the board's right is, and the board's right is in its fiduciary responsibilities, and underneath that comes how do you spend your money and where you spend it. So, and he said that is a right that cannot be taken away from the school board because it is in statute that is a right that belongs only to school boards. So, definitely says that.
Well, the other thing that I also recall is that it's very unusual for a question to be put out to voters that offered an option A, option B, rather than here's an option yes or no, and that the sort of structure of the fundamental question that the petition requested the board to put out to the voters was kind of not best practice, I guess, is how to frame it. So that was another thing. And we had talked about that as a board when we contemplated it the first time around was, there were some folks on the board that felt uncomfortable that there were these two options that required a change to the article and didn't, offer a no change or a status quo change. So I think that, that was another thing that he kind of picked up on as well, was the structure of the question to be posed to the community itself was,
right, and that within that structure, the town vote is in essence giving the town the right to veto a school closure, whereas the district vote is, we are a district. We're not a collection of towns with individual rights and responsibilities. We are one district. And so a town vote would be giving that town a right to veto above other towns. So we said, you know, that seems improper, but not being illegal, but improper.
Was this a conversation, or is there anything that you can share with us in writing?
It literally was a conversation that happened at 4:30 or 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right before we,
Because the email came in at
1 o'clock, it took us a little while to.
And I'm wondering, you know, future, would it make sense to do a session with him, you know, with the full board, so that.
Well, when you're only given the 4 hours.
I don't know, no,
Yeah, in the
I mean,
future, certainly.
yeah,
Yes.
no, I didn't
Yes.
mean now, I understood that, but, and I would find it interesting to also be included in that, and obviously we couldn't meet today, but, possibly schedule another session with the full board, so that.
Well, I think we're going to vote on this today, and then certainly if other issues come up where we need legal counsel, we can discuss that. You know, him, as Pietro has done during executive session and such.
No, I would echo that, and I understand the context of today, but it does seem like past conversations with Pietro that had to do with the charter change happened with just the executive committee, when it could have happened in executive session with the full board. So past conversations with lawyers about this has only been with the executive, when you've had it. So just.
I would say that might be true for this year, but in years past, there have been, like last year, there was, I believe, a discussion about this matter with Pietro or in executive session.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no further questions about that letter. We'll move on. I'll ask Suzanne to sort of present the language that we're going to be discussing, and then I'll ask for a motion, and then we can discuss and vote on it.
So, just so everyone's clear, I'm going to read what the current Article 14 language is, and then I will go over the two options that the ad hoc committee came up with, and they are, the way I'm reading them is just the way they have to be listed on the piece of paper. They aren't, one is better than the other. So the current Article 14 language is, an affirmative vote of 10 members of the Addison Central School District Board of Directors shall be required to approve the closure of a school. Prior to holding a vote on whether to close a school, the board shall hold public hearings regarding the proposed school closures, at least one of which must be held in the town in which the school is located. Following the public hearing, the Addison Central School District Board of Directors shall give public notice of its intent to hold a vote on whether to close a school, stating the reason for the closure at least 10 days prior to the vote. So that is the current language that was voted on when we unified. So the next one, and I'll stop and I'll tell you where most of the board all has their copies, but since you don't have a copy, I'll tell you the changes are. The next option is a affirmative vote of 10 members or more of the Addison, so it's 10, we put in the number 10, and then members or more, the or more is new, of the Addison Central School District Board of Directors, and then the new phrase, and the consent of the Addison Central School District electorate shall be required to approve the closure of a school. Prior to holding a vote on whether to close a school, the board shall hold new language, at least 3 public hearings regarding the proposed school closure, new language, or closure. At least one, and we added this numeric number 1, of the public hearings shall be held in the town or towns, yes, new, in which the school, new S, is or are is new, located. Following the public hearings, the Addison Central School District Board of Directors shall give public notice of its intent to hold a vote on whether to close a school, stating the reason for the closure, and a new language, which shall include identifying the impacts of school closure and mitigation strategies. And then goes back to the old language of at least 10 days prior to the vote. And then new
new language is, if the board votes to close the school, a binding referendum to that effect shall be submitted to the annual or special meeting for approval by the voters of the Addison Central School District. The school closing shall become effective only if approved by a majority of the electorate voting by Australian ballot. The vote shall be counted and recorded by towns, which shall be commingled, and approval of the referendum shall require a majority of all those voting. So that last paragraph that I just read is all new, and I think Mary Heather's just going to try to pull it up. And then the next one that we have is, again, an affirmative vote of 10, again, number 10. Members or more of the Addison Central School District Board of Directors and the new language and the consent of the electorate of the affected town shall be required, affected town, that is new language, shall be required to approve the closure of a school. Prior to holding a vote on whether to close the school, the board shall hold new language, at least 3 and new language, public hearings regarding the proposed school closure added in S. At least 1 added in number 1 of the public hearing shall be held in the town, the added in S, in which the school added in S is, again, the word R, located. Following the public hearings, the Addison Central School District Board of Directors shall give public notice of its intent to hold a vote on whether to close the school, stating the reason for the closure in the new language, which shall identify the impacts of school closure and mitigation strategies at least 10 days prior to vote. And in new language, if the board votes to close the school, a binding referendum to that effect shall be submitted to an annual or special meeting for approval by the electorate of the affected town. The school closing shall become effective only if approved by a majority of the electorate voting by Australian ballot. And that is the ad hoc committee's report, which has been submitted in writing. And it's just brought it up. So you can see.
Sorry, it's so small then.
Where I said new language, it's highlighted in the yellow. And I believe what the procedure we were thinking was that we would entertain, Victoria would ask for a motion, and one of these would be turned into a motion, and then we would take a second on it. There'd be conversation around it, discussion, proceed to vote, and if it goes up or down, then we would vote on the other. And if neither one path, from what I believe you said is your procedure, was if neither of the optional changes passes, then we would stick with the current Article 14.
Committee was who?
The committee was Steve Orsitt, Mary Heather Noble, Joanna Doria, Barb, and myself.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't introduce ourselves.
No, I thought that's who it was, but I just publicly announced.
As we weigh this, are we looking for a majority or a supermajority? A majority.
And the chair, as in Robert's rule, the chair only votes if it's going to impact the outcome.
Yes. I would like to make a motion.
Terrific.
Good. I would like to make a motion that we adopt the language that's set forth by the ad hoc committee for requiring that a town vote occur prior to closing a school.
Second.
Thank you.
Discussion. And the motion on the table is for the town vote, the majority of the board vote.
There's a second.
And there was a second. By Joe.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
I know, it's hard.
I know, it's hard to this line. Jump in.
And I would like to make a comment, if I could.
Yes. There are several reasons why I support changing Article 14 to the language drafted by the ad hoc committee. First and foremost is democratic accountability. There were many benefits with district consolidation. However, I believe one of the negative impacts was the loss of democratic accountability. I recently read an article that highlighted that with district consolidation, it is much harder for individual committees within the consolidated district to hold the district accountable when it comes to the education of their children. The article went on to say that larger, more encompassing districts dilute democratic participation in schools and, as a result, distance schools from the community. Since I've been actively involved, I have witnessed this dilution and distancing across several towns. I strongly believe that requiring a town vote to close a school helps to counterbalance this loss. I often hear the argument made that rural communities are a problem because they don't want to give up local control. I don't think this line of thinking gets to the crux of the matter. What I hear when I speak to parents and community members is that they have concerns about how closing their school will impact the learning and emotional outcomes of the children impacted. Oftentimes they express frustration because when they bring up specific concerns to our board, these concerns are not addressed. And even if they get the ear of one or two board members, this doesn't guarantee that the other board members will agree to address those issues. I don't believe our rural towns are hung up on giving up their local control. I believe they are just trying to achieve democratic accountability and equity to ensure that their children don't become a casualty in the process of closing schools. Equity has no traction without democracy. When a district is made up of 7 towns, including a shire town, how do we ensure that one or more towns are not marginalized? I am particularly concerned for those children having special education needs or living in poverty or other adverse situations that impact their social and emotional well-being. Requiring a town vote helps to reduce this risk of harming our children. It makes us accountable as a board to address the downsides of consolidating schools, regardless of who is serving on the board at any given time, including the cost of the mitigation strategies to address those downsides. This will also give a more accurate accounting of the anticipated savings prior to closing a school. I believe the only way to protect our rural children from becoming a casualty is through a town vote. A town vote gives rural communities the leverage they need to ensure that the negative educational impacts of closing a school are addressed. As Peter Lynch highlighted in his recent letter to the editor in the Addison Independent, the impacted community will have the incentive to take the time to research and understand the facts and the consequences. And in the end, our democratic process will hold the board accountable.
Or if you can find, send me a copy of that.
Email?
Questions, comments?
I'll speak in support of this as well. And just to follow up on what Barb said at the end, I also really appreciated Peter's op-ed and the argument is often made, I think, that a town vote is an obstacle and that it's a hurdle to something. And I think the opposite. I think it's a real opportunity for the board to really engage in good faith dialogue with the people of an affected town. I think we need to take that responsibility very seriously, and having a governance structure that forces us to do it is the best way to do that. It holds us accountable. It forces us to come up with a plan that shows people in that town that it's in their interests, and that it is that we're coming from a place that is seeking like mutually positive outcomes. We talk a lot about equity, and this decision is one of those that I think really flies in the face of what we often do. Equity is about voice. It's about having a say. It's about decision making. And these decisions disproportionately impact towns, and those towns deserve the right to vote, to have a larger say because of that disproportionate impact. It's a principle in a way, but I think it also is the kind of principle that produces outcomes that we all think are desirable what are the kinds of impacts or principles that, force us to really think hard with towns about what's right for the kids there in that community. So for those reasons, I would support the town vote.
I would speak with regret. I don't agree with either of you. Obviously, over time, that's how we are. Both statements. Act 46 was put in for many different reasons. Consolidation, just financial or other reasons. But one of the things that it did, and I'm sure it did, was to take away the idea of town schools, or at least blur those boundaries. I think that was pretty obvious in the whole thing of having unified districts that would have one board and one governance structure that would be dealing with all the buildings, schools, whatever their names are in that district. And, I just never can get by that fact that the moment you take away or put in something that allows that school or that town, because that's the electorate of the town we're talking about, to have control completely and not the district, that to me is undemocratic, okay? When in fact, it used to be that schools were funded by their towns, they said what the curriculum was, whatever it was. That's changed. People may not like that, but that has changed. And we now have a more central way to deal with it, and there is no town that I can think for whatever reason is going to close their school if they're not paying for it. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So as we vote on a budget, as the elected votes on every one of us, whatever town we're in, it makes no sense that it would be closing the school would not have a district-wide vote after the board. We haven't discussed that particular supermajority issue, but yet that's another issue. But still, the board has the final say, and I just think strongly it would be a great mistake to take that away from the governing boards, this board and all the future boards.
Changing the charter either to add town or district vote pretty simply means us agreeing to share the power over school closure. The question for me isn't if we should, but how we should. Advocates for adding a district-wide vote argue that because the district holds the constituents that are fiscally responsible, that the power should be shared with the district. As a concept, this has merit to consider. I believe in fairness, and I don't think we as a board should have the power to unilaterally financially burden the community, all the while keeping their voices out of it. That's not democratic. But then I considered how a district-wide vote, one that has direct oversight over the fiscal question at hand, already currently exists, the annual budget. Every year, the district is given the opportunity to use its voice and power. It's a vote, and it's meaningful. And we are held accountable to not only inform our voters, but also, in a way, trust our voters. So it seems to me that we already have the fiscal oversight burden piece of it all in place. It's in state statute, after all. Then the question for me is now, what are we missing? The idea of adding an effective town vote to the charter is sometimes twisted or misconstrued. In the very near future, we as a board will be faced with some significant questions and difficult decisions to make. I am not going to pretend that we're not. Because of that reality, and not in spite of it, I want to proceed with those difficult discussions as a community's partner and not their authority. I think if we choose to work with towns as allies, we will have more chances for success. We can account for unintended short and long-term consequences,
we can correct for some of the pervasive misconceptions that have been allowed to exist. We can be sure that we have put the most impacted and vulnerable voices at the forefront. In fact, isn't that what equity is all about? I believe this is our opportunity to show our community that we are focused on real equity and in good faith engagement. I trust that all of our families not only want what's best for their town's kids, but also their neighbors' kids. We have to trust our towns if we are presuming to ask for their trust in return. I think the only way to achieve this is to add what's been missing in our charter. Affected town vote is reflected in all but 2, and we are one of them, districts that also happen to require a supermajority board vote. Some, yes, do have sunsets put in place, but some also recognize it in perpetuity, and some ask for a unanimous board vote. In our context, I don't think adding it is asking too much. I think it's exactly what we need to do to help begin to restore trust in our school politics.
I don't think I agree that no town would vote to close its school if it was presented with a vision for how that loss would be offset by the benefit to students across the district. I've never felt like that as a Cornwall resident. There may be people who would never vote to close their schools, no matter what. But I actually really believe that if people are given something to vote for, they want to do it. And I also believe that people care about their kids and other kids. And voters already have a lot of authority over decisions that the board also has to make. Budget, bonds, there are all kinds of things that we are required to go to the voters to get their approval for. And it holds the board accountable to thinking very thoughtfully about the planning and the communication of those decisions. And the voters of this district are responsible, and they're compassionate, and they're engaged. And I think if you're working with an electorate like that, you can have confidence that if you show up to those conversations with real communication of what the plan is, how it will benefit people, including other kids, I think they will show up the way that you hope they will. I say this as a parent and a voter, now as a school board member for a temporary appointment, but I've been speaking to a lot of people. I spoke with Peter Conlon about this, and he and I agreed that this is more about, it's interesting, Barb, I think of it as accountability, but I had been thinking of it as accountability for the best possible plan for every kid in the district, and then the best communicated plan for how it gets us there. And I have that confidence in voters. So I think if you show up to a town and say, this is a loss, and then here is the gain, there are some people you'll never convince, but I think there are a lot of people who are ready to have that conversation. So I think the board should act in good faith with the people who elect members to be here and treat people like reasonable partners in that process.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the prepared statements that you guys have brought to the table. It just helps me kind of know I'm going to hopefully get it right when I drop the minutes. And I think, there are compelling arguments, right? I, like Chip, cannot get past, ACSD is a district. We have a fiduciary and a legal responsibility to provide for all of our students with the limited resources we have. And I do feel like handing over a decision about allocation of those resources to one town over the rest of the district is improper. I feel like it's legally improper. All this talk about, trusting voters and we've got voters who are engaged, and I think that's true across the district. And I think folks who are really pushing for a town vote don't have trust that, the rest of the voters also expect a compelling argument, also expect figures and plans, and also expect some kind of description of what the mitigation strategies are going to be for the impacts to their neighbors. I mean, we're all neighbors here. So I feel like there is this kind of mutual distrust kind of contributing to this conflict. And I feel like there can be ways to work around that when we are actually in the moment. But conceptually, at a high level, this is a decision that statutorily is given to the board. And we are, in fact, a unified district. And I feel like a lot of this is kind of a make ACSD, ACSU again sort of effort. And we're not ACSU anymore. We are a unified district with one budget and an electorate that is responsible for that budget, responsible for filling these seats. And so I feel, therefore, it's much more appropriate for if this board decides to turn this matter from a board decision to an electorate decision, that electorate should be a district and not a town. I also think this, the reporting of the numbers about how many districts have town vote is very misleading. Actually, the number of districts that currently have town vote is much less than all but 2. All but 2 was at the very beginning when there was a statutory requirement to have the town vote. Okay, so I don't think that's a really fair statistic to put forward. I feel like, we need to, present information that is accurate. And I guess the other thing, and this is where I start to get a little about, this talk about accountability and equity. Where is the accountability to the students whose towns and parents don't have the time and ability to, hire an attorney to send a letter to the board at 1 o'clock in the afternoon before we're supposed to vote on this? What about, there are students impacted by a disparity in resources in this district currently. Where is the concern for equity for those students? I have a hard time getting behind this, the folks without a voice. I'm not sure that I see, some of our wealthier communities as the folks without a voice. I'm sorry. I feel like the folks without a voice are students and families who struggle to get the resources they need to get the education services they need. And I feel like that's our responsibility. And we have spent a lot of time on this issue, talking about town stuff when we should be talking about education. And I feel like this board decided to open up the conversation and offer like a compromise, like, okay, let's talk about bringing it to the electorate. Let's talk about it. And we're talking about it, and I feel like the district electorate, adding that to our articles of agreement is a reasonable compromise. And, to get this letter from SOS at the last minute, to me, only fortifies my prior statement about the lengths to which some folks will go to keep their school open for their children. And we're not even talking about closing the school at this moment, right? So I have a hard time believing that, folks are gonna not put up some serious legal fights as we try to resolve inequitable distribution of resources in our district. And it just upsets me, it makes me sad. I would not support this. I would absolutely consider the second one. And those are my reasons. I've talked too much already, I'm sorry.
When I look at option 1 and option 2, they both include 3 public meetings, one in the town of the. It also includes lots of conversations about how the decision was made if this might be the school, etc. So it seems to me that we are getting that information out to the entire electorate, and we have to trust the entire electorate to understand that these are the situations that made us come to this decision. I feel like having one school have, being able to say, no, we're not going to do that, discounts all the other conversations that happen to all the other towns. So if we're going to have 3 public meetings that go into great detail about what the board is proposing, I think we have to open it up to the entire electorate, not just the one town that can say forget it. So I agree with Mary Heather, I agree with Chip, and I think the most democratic thing is that we present all the information and then trust our voters throughout the district to make the best decisions.
I am by nature and by training a historian. And when I look at the various positions that have been put forward, sometimes through deception and sometimes through mischaracterization, especially from the folks that belong to SOS, the town district, or the town code, as you said, Mary Heather, looks back. It looks to the past. It looks to something that doesn't or shouldn't exist anymore, as much as a one-room schoolhouse shouldn't exist anymore. Because some of the schools that we are currently supporting do not have the resources to provide a modern education. We had one person come in here and tell us, after they voted to leave the district, how it was unfair that they didn't have a full-time principal at their school. The reason they don't have a full-time principal at their school is you can't justify it with the students that work at that school. These are hard decisions that are being made by the district. And most of the appeals that have come through have been emotional appeals. I haven't seen any data coming from the Save Our Schools people. The Save Our Schools board members here are pretty much putting forward a position that's been placed on them by Save Our Schools. We are looking backwards by not embracing mandates that are coming in and saying, you have to provide equal education. You have to provide these supports. Back in the day, when they had a one-room schoolhouse, you had a teacher. You didn't have a counselor. You didn't have a behavior interventionist. You didn't have a social worker. You didn't have a principal. You had one teacher responsible for teaching all of the kids, K through 5, in that community. Hopefully we have gone past that. And now, I think it's time to move past that again. We're not talking about, in some of our schools, we're not talking about a one-room schoolhouse. We're talking about a 3-room schoolhouse. I have a little bit of trouble with that. And I have a little bit of trouble with saying, well, my kids are just fine. Well, maybe your kids don't need the special services. Maybe your kids don't want the opportunities. Maybe you don't want that to happen. But to say that it shouldn't be available for anyone in that district or in that school, I think is very short-sighted. And you want to ask for examples of things like systemic bias. Nobody said it yet because we've already been talking about income levels. In some of our rural schools, there is no ethnic or there is no racial diversity. You could make the argument that some of those people are arguing that they don't want their students educated in a multiracial population. So
that wouldn't be true.
Yeah.
So you make the argument, but it wouldn't be true. So I'm saying, what is your point?
My point is that there are lots of appeals to emotion out there. And I think
I'm just trying to clarify, what is the point of
I think it's inappropriate for a board member lots of arguments out there, and I think that many of the times, that many of the things that we've heard are appeals to emotion, which is, if you know anything about debate, is a logical fallacy. It should not be appealing to emotion. And when you have people out there saying that emotion is data, we can't operate on that. We have to use real data. We can take it into account. But there's lots of falsehoods out there. There are lots of deceptive characterizations of what this board has done. As one of the board members has already said, we have not talked about closing any school. Not only do we not have any criteria, it's not been a discussion of this board. And yet, we're being told, shouldn't you close this school or that school? I think it's beyond absurd for this school board to surrender one of the only powers that it has to try to bring a budget in line. It's one of the only things that we have by statute. Hire the superintendent, decide what facilities we should or shouldn't use. And when you take that power away from the board, you have a situation where we have all of the responsibility and none of the power. And if you know anything about being in a job, that's an unwinnable situation. And by saying that a town can come in and override what we say about the school closures, seems a bit absurd to me, because then we can't do anything. What's next? I mean, if it's one of the few powers that's reserved for the school board, what's next? That now we have to have a town vote about whether to hire or fire a superintendent, because that's one of the only other powers that we have. Is that what comes next? And as to whether this is going to get resolved, it's never going to get resolved. People say, well, we need to do this and move on. We have a group in our community, the Save Our Schools group, who will only stop when they get a town vote. This is all of something. And when they say, well, we won't say that we'll never close a school. Explain to me what the situation is, because you haven't yet to do that. You talk about what are our criteria, what are your criteria, what will you accept as a valid reason to close the school? Because it's obviously not that there's not enough administrators there, and it's obviously not that there's not a school nurse there, and it's obviously not the fact that there's no diversity in our school, because those don't seem to be high enough bars for you to be arguing about. I think that people can appeal to emotion, and I think that they can get voters to say, to do things that they will later regret. And that the school board, by its very nature, are the people who try to be the most informed about the decisions that are happening in our district. I object completely to either of the town votes. I object completely to Article 14. But I am in a very small minority. I think that we should do away with Article 14 and return power to close or open schools to the school board alone, which is where statute says it should belong. That's my piece.
Okay. Seems like we're all sort of going around here. This is something that I've thought a lot about and really struggled with. I think both sides have a compelling argument. And I started to think about myself, as a voter, and not, I have this school board hat, but also as a voter. And so the argument, you have to convince, you have to, show voters what they have to look forward to. You're losing the school, so the town votes, show them what they're going to be gaining. But I guess where I'm uncomfortable is maybe like trust. So we're saying that we don't trust that all the rest of the electorate would require the same level of convincing. To me it seems like it would be harder to convince the entire school district to close a school than just a small town. And then I'm thinking about myself as somebody who votes in the town of Middlebury at every single election. And if, fundamentally putting students first, what's best for the students, trying to keep schools open at all costs, being creative about how that happens. If it came down to a vote and the school board, say 10 years from now this happens and I'm not on the school board anymore, I want to be able to vote and say that, no, I don't want to vote, I do not want to close that school. I want to be able to cast my vote in the district. You need to convince me as a citizen of Middlebury that, closing Ripton is going to be best for Ripton, or closing Bridgeport, or whatever school. And it's sort of come around to that for me, that it feels like it would be harder to convince the entire district than just one town. If you look at the numbers of people who actually go out to vote in some of these towns, it could be, in theory, it could be too easy to convince the majority of voters that, yes, we should close this school because of whatever reason. So, I don't think that it's on the table. I don't know that it'll be on the table during my tenure as a school board member. But if there ever is a vote and the decision is, we can no longer keep all the schools open. We can't think of any creative ideas. We can't put the special program up in Ripton. We can't do anything with, we're going to close this school. Like, I want to cast a vote, and I want to go around to everyone I know in Middlebury and say, that school board has not done its homework, and the students in that school are losing and not gaining. And I want to be able to knock on all my neighbors' doors so that they will vote to not close that school. I don't want it to just be like just the town, I don't know. But this is a really difficult argument because I don't know, just spent way too much time thinking about it. And then I go back to, the resources, and I do want to put this, just make a decision and move on. I want to talk about achievement gaps, and this is not impacting our students today. There are so many other things that are, and we're just spending so much time dealing with this. And what about math scores and reading scores and students of today not getting their needs met? And if we have to allocate resources to an attorney to just go through the motions and go through the motions on this, then I guess that's what we have to do. But I believe that, if a town is if a school is going to close, that we all have each other's backs. I don't think that I think this is putting town against town, and I don't like that. I think that we are going to stand up for our students, and that my son plays sports with students in every one of the elementary schools, and I don't want any one of those kids to lose their school. And if their school does get closed, there better be a really good reason why they're going to be gaining, or that would be when I would, take time to go try to convince people. This board, the board of the future, whatever that is, they're not doing this right. They haven't made enough. These students are not gaining, they're just losing. And I think there are a lot of other people who would take their time to do that as well, and to stand up for these small towns. I really think we need to trust each other and believe that if the question on the table is to close a school, that the community as a whole is going to stand up for each other, and we're not going to let the students in one school go down. I don't know, maybe it's just kind of overly optimistic, naive thinking, but I would stand up for that more than just about anything. So I don't know. Part of me wants to vote for the town, but I don't want to give up my right to advocate when the time comes, if the time ever does come. I don't know. So this is a tough one. Thanks.
Anyone else before we
as I've gone around, I talked with the voters and the community members, and I see them at the grocery store and wherever. A lot of them were they were excited but saddened when the vote came to allow Ripton to leave. They felt that, we were all in this together, but they understood what Ripton wanted. And so they trusted the voters, and they all came together and they supported Ripton and Ripton's desire to leave the district because Ripton wanted to do what they felt was right for their students and for their community, and this
entire district supported them. And then on the backside of it, when the State Board of Education told Ripton that they and only they could have their vote to come back to the district, voters then felt slighted. They're like, well, you know, we helped them in what they wanted to do, but we weren't allowed to return, to allow them to return. So they, you know, there's this imbalance that people have felt. But the other piece that I worry about is we aren't at a point in time to close schools. But we may, 5, 10 years down the road, I don't know when that time may come, but we have so many other really important and precious things to be spending our money on. They are our students, they are our children, and the more money we spend arguing over who's going to close the school and whose right it is, when we aren't even there yet, we're taking dollars away from their education. We're taking dollars away from students with special needs. Special needs students don't normally have a voice in what they need because they have yet to learn how to advocate for themselves. Some of their parents even struggle advocating for themselves and for their children. So I really get upset when we spend so much money, when we're not talking about students, when we're not talking about the data, we're not talking about the educational achievement of our children and where they are going. We need to be doing that work. That is the crucial work of this board. Understanding what our budget can support for our students and is it working? And if we're not doing that, then we're not really fulfilling our commitment to not only to our voters, but to ourselves and to the greater society. I can only support a district-wide vote, and I say that because of the people that I've spoken to across all towns, across the district, and everyone that I've spoken to has said that we're going to change it. They only want to see a district vote. And yes, I will admit, I have come across a few that have said they only want a town vote, but the majority of people that I've spoken to have said district vote or no change. So that's all I'm going to say. All right.
I'm not going to say anything further, but I am going to make a motion to amend what's before the board. I make a motion that we remove the language about supermajority and that we change affirmative vote from 10 members to 7 members, which is a simple majority of the board. The rationale being that we are putting a hurdle in place that we need to, that we no longer need a supermajority.
So we're going to be voting on this either yes, I don't have, I'm sorry, if in fact we're voting on the motion that's on the floor, which was made, about accepting the second one, which is a town vote.
So there's a motion on the floor. Steve has proposed an amendment. He to that motion, which needs to be seconded. If it gets seconded, then we'll vote on the amendment first, and then we'll vote on the amended motion.
Can I ask for clarification? So what the amendment would be, what are proposed?
Correct.
But changing
removing
the board vote to majority and not, so it would be majority board, majority town, instead of supermajority board, majority town. Sure, following this.
Well, let's get a second and then we can discuss it. Anyone want to second that motion? There's no second, so we're going to move on to the motion that's on the table. Ready to vote, or does anyone have last one?
Are there other people that want to this meeting. Not everyone on the board has spoken here, not that they have to, but I do.
Everybody had the opportunity.
People's opinions.
I'll just mention, personally, I believe there's a legal cloud on this whole situation. It doesn't bother me whether the letter came in 24 hours ago, 4 hours from now. I found that it had some validity. I think there's a real question as to whether any vote should be taken tonight. I am going to personally abstain.
I'll be short and simple. I think it's straightforward. We're a unified district, and I see no place for an individual town to vote in a unified district.
That's it. All right, so with the motion on the table, we're going to vote. All those in favor of the motion presented by Barb and seconded by Joanne, please say aye. So raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. And all those opposed, please say aye. Yeah, please say aye. 4, 5, 6. All right, and there's 1 abstention. Any other abstentions? 2 abstentions. All right, so the motion has not passed. So could I get a motion for the second proposed? So moved. Who's that? Mary Ann? Oh, thank you.
I'll second.
Second by Taylor. All right, discussion on this, or we all discuss?
I would just say the same thing I said before. I think that something like this really holds the board accountable to communicating with the voters and showing them the vision, like you talked about, Lindsay, for how all the kids are uplifted by a hard, painful decision that has a brighter future for everybody at the end of it, so.
All right, seeing no other conflict,
Yeah, actually, I would like to make a motion to amend the wording in the motion to include supermajority of the electorate. So like if you look at it, it would basically say, if the board votes to close a school, a binding referendum to the effect shall be submitted, so on and so forth. The school, I'm making sure. If approved by the majority of the electorate, it would be a super majority of the electorate who's voting by Australian vote. Okay, sorry.
So we have amendment to the motion on the table. Can I get a second? Or anyone seconding? Joanna seconds it.
Clarification, what is a supermajority of the electorate? Is it the people voting?
Of the people.
Or of all the people that could vote?
Of the votes cast. So we have
So
about
3/4 vote of the votes cast.
Of the votes cast, the capacity of votes cast.
What is a supermajority?
Yeah, what is
Define different.
2/3, 3/4?
It needs to be defined.
It needs to be defined, yeah. So I will take a crack at that. So I've seen in some of the other articles where it was 3/4, so I would start there. So the way I would word this is that it approved by 3/4 of the electorate, I'm sorry, if approved by a 3/4 majority of the electorate voting by Australian ballot for the district.
Okay, so the motion has been amended and it's, we have a second. I mean, to include 3/4 of the voting electorate.
So there's been a motion to amend, the motion hasn't been amended.
No, the motion hasn't been amended. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
So there's been a motion to amend.
There's been a motion to amend.
Has there been a second?
Yes, Joanna second. Are there questions, comments?
Yeah. The reason is very similar to what I articulated for the town level vote, and it really, I think Peter Lynch said it very well in his letter to the editor. As much as I would like to hope that everyone that goes to vote in March is well informed, I know that that's not true. There's many folks that aren't really following what's happening, and this would help to counter that. Because unless you happen to be affected by it in some way, it's easy not to be as involved in it, and therefore may basically be making a vote and a decision based on what you perceive to be true as opposed to the facts and the data that's been presented. And so to help guard against that, what would help me, with a district level vote as opposed to a town level vote, would see a super majority of 3/4.
So, to clarify for this one, okay. We are not talking about registered voters, we're talking about the total number of people who votes cast on that day, in any manner, absentee in person. And is part of the amendment to specify that the percentage supermajority mirror that of the board, which would be approximately 75% supermajority.
Right, and I didn't do the math. So
7.76.
If we did the math, I would be happy to change that. I was just pulling up my.
Ours is 10, right?
Yeah, 10 divided by
0.769.
Yeah, so I'm exactly 3/4.
So, okay, so that's specifically the amendment. That's
parallels.
That's 3/4, okay.
As disappointed as I was that the town vote didn't pass, this makes a lot of sense to me for the same reasons why the charter committee came up with it for the board vote, for the exact same reasons. To allow for a balance of the electorate, to balance the population of the flagship town with the rural towns.
Can I ask, what do you mean that the charter committee came up with that? Because that's not what the charter committee presented. So what do you mean by that? Oh, not the committee that researched the charter. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the original.
Thank you.
Right?
Yes.
That, I don't know how many votes we have on all the different issues, not just school board, but around. There are very, very few votes that get 75% or more. So to me, that's just an obstructionist way to say this will never pass anybody, no matter how much support it is. Even late. So these kind of guys that have been there forever and aren't even running campaigns. There's no way. Vote against this for sure.
I guess I feel like, again, this whole conversation is really, to me, it's supposed to be about who's making the decision, right? Is it just the board, or is it the board and the electorate? And the electorate, sorry, I'm not saying that correctly. As a district. And I feel like we have the supermajority in place with the board, which means that the reasons for doing this have to be pretty compelling for the board to agree that, okay, we're going to kick this over to the voters. I guess the supermajority of the electorate is just such an it's inconsistent with the other decisions that are made by our electorate, right? I understand obviously the gravity of closing the school, but also on the other side, there's the gravity of not responsibly managing a budget and responsibly distributing resources to your students, there is real consequence to that, tangible consequence to that, generational impacts. And I feel like to tie a board's hands with requiring a 75% majority of the electorate to be able to manage its resources responsibly sets a board up for potential like financial malpractice, frankly. And that concerns me.
I don't know of any election that's taken place where you need 75% of the voters to approve the vote. If it's a close enough vote that you do a recount, I understand that. But 75%, I mean, does anybody know of any election that had to go through that kind of a standard? No.
It's like a scientist, I don't know, you're like an expert, never thought about it in elections.
Sociologist, however, all these books.
So I'm looking at last year's Middlebury results, and our budget passed by over 75%. Our property tax collection states passed by over 75%. The EMS exemption of taxes, over 75%. Funding Addison Allies Network, over 75%. There is a precedent for this is just Middlebury. I could go through the other towns.
You're talking about Middlebury.
I'm talking about Middlebury because I didn't have much time to Google it.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a precedent for, I mean, I grew up in a town where the budget never passed. It had to go to a second vote, a third vote, a fourth vote. So we have the budget as one fail-safe that the electorate could veto the structure of the budget. But if I were to look at the other towns and I were to look historically, I would not be surprised to see an overwhelming support of what the elected officials being the school board, put forth to the voters. So although Lakey might not get the majority, the uncontested, of course, they get the majority, but to say, oh, that's a big bar to set. I think that we have made that bar, and I don't know. I think that we have the support of the voters when we put that budget. There's a lot of time that's put into that. We really have to make a strong argument for that, and the voters come forward and support the evidence, the documentation, the facts and figures, black and white, and say, yes, do it. Go for it the first time. We don't question you. You did a good job with this. So like last year, just in Middlebury, the yeses were 1,076, the noes were a mere 137. And so I could try to be really quick and look at all the other towns and like go back a few years, but I just don't think I have it in me right now. So.
I'm not sure comparing a budget vote with a school closure vote is really, I mean, it's a totally different question.
But so is Lakey getting elected. It's just to say that voters support when the work is done. It's not unheard of to get an overwhelming majority of support for something that the board is putting forth. It's apples and oranges, but it's still fruit.
Same kind of comparison.
The result is we still have to, we live by the result.
I think on point of order, I mean, she's talking, it's part of Robert.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to have this time.
I was called on to talk, so.
She was done and I called her.
Yeah. But you're right.
All right, so we have a amendment to the motion that's on the table. There's a second. All those in favor of amending the motion as Barb requested, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say aye.
Nay.
Sorry. So we have a tie, and so I will cast my votes with the nays, which means the motion doesn't pass. So it brings us back to the motion as originally stated, that's on the table, that has been seconded. We're ready to vote on that.
I would like to propose that we remove the supermajority from this to say 7 members.
Is there a second or? Second discussion, questions around the amended motion?
If I was hearing correctly, one of the arguments against the supermajority of the board was that there would be a supermajority of the board, and that would create a balance. I feel like if this motion were to move forward, then we've lost that potential for balance. So to feel, and honestly, I think it sows so much division, just an unnecessary amount of conflict around a really painful and emotional conversation where data and reason and respect need to be part of it. And I think this really would move us backwards in pretty destructive ways.
Seeing none.
I guess I will just put forward for the record, I agree with Ellen about this zoning division. I don't think this is necessarily in the spirit of the compromise that I was envisioning for us as a board. However, I do just want to also say that I think the argument for removing the supermajority is supportive of moving this from the board to the community. So it's, if the purpose of putting this to the electorate is to increase the voices of the electorate in this decision-making process, then why would you have a barrier to the board putting that out to the electorate? And I think that's the reasoning behind this. So I think for some folks, it's seen as a protected layer or a protected process. But I think also you could argue that this board decides, okay, we want to share this responsibility with the electorate. We want to be able to pose that question to the electorate. I think the purpose for this amendment would be to remove that barrier to get it out to the electorate easily. But I also, just for the record, I agree with Ellen. I'm not sure this is how it would be perceived in the community. So
Yes, I think by, removing the supermajority would do several things from a negative perspective. First of all, that supermajority of the board really does require that the board really wrestle with the issues before they take it to the electorate. We don't want to be just taking things to the electorate unless we have really focused on, what are the issues regarding closing schools, that kind of thing. And it also then puts it in a position where one town, which has 7, board members, could actually carry the vote, which is the whole reason that supermajority was in there, because there's one board member from each town, and the area has 7 board members. So, yes, you can argue that we're there for the entire district, that's very much true, but conceptually that could happen, right? And I think the original intent of our charter was to really protect against one town really being able to make the decision above and beyond the rest of the board. And so I think because of that, I would, really object to that amendment.
I won't take credit for this idea, but it does seem strange that the supermajority language can be removed from the supermajority. And it makes me wonder if it was really supermajority to begin with, and it can be removed from the supermajority. I mean, does that make sense?
deal with us.
Yeah, us voting tonight, like there's a reason why the simple majority was put in there, and to be able to be removed by a simple majority just doesn't seem right.
All right. Motion on that. So we have an amended motion. All those in favor of the amended motion, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Thank you. Joanna, I'm thinking that, and I could be wrong, but I'm thinking that the supermajority is about creating something so tremendously impactful to the entire district. That's why it says in the articles as majority, but we aren't actually moving anything forward tonight. We're taking that away. Okay, but we
That's supposed to be some of the. What was the count?
2 ayes. I don't know.
And any abstentions? Did anyone abstain? No. Okay. All right, so we're back to the original second motion. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Wait, we're not really discussions anymore? We are now, okay, sorry.
Are there any further comments on the original? On the original
District-wide vote with supermajority.
Supermajority of the.
So we're voting, clarification.
Yes.
Okay, so the vote that we're about to have is to say yes or no to the second block.
Yeah, correct.
Yes. In its entirety, without any changes. That part of it. She's going to help us clarification.
All those.
I want milk, it'll reduce the temperature, and I have to throw the whole thing away. I don't want to do that.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those in seven.
Just keep our hands up again.
Yeah, sure. 2, 3. Sorry, I did this. All those opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? Others? So the motion passes. Congratulations. Ready? All right. Thank you all.
Can I make a comment to Ellen about this? Unfortunately, we can't have a democracy without divisiveness.
Without what, I'm sorry.
About divisiveness.
Yes.
And I respect that, but we can't always find compromise, which we have tried to do, okay, all of us, by bringing this up.
I think this was.
And it was, yes, and we have compromised. So, even though, yes, there's times when there's close votes and there's arguments about things, divisiveness is a part of us discussing it. And hopefully we go from it and go to other things we need to do.
And thank you all for your preparation, close study, and thoughtfulness on this issue. All right. We are ready to move on to discussion about the superintendent search. Superintendent. Oh, did I miss it?
Yeah.
That was, I think that was kind of like purposeful.
I move that we, with sadness, accept our superintendent's recommendation.
Must we do with sadness? Is that the motion? With sadness?
Can I get a second? Second. Thank you. All those, or any discussion, comments, questions? See
none, all those in favor? Oh, would you like to say something?
I mean, I shared it with all of you in writing briefly, but when I think about the 10 years that I've been here and everything that we've been through, and when I say we, I talk about so many people that are not at the table here that I've had the honor and great fortune to work with. There are so many people throughout all of our 7 towns that care so deeply about what happens here, about students. We've done so much together. I think the thing that impacts me the most as I think about my time here has been how so many individuals have kind of put aside what's important to them, and it's really, really clear that they care about making the community stronger and school stronger. And I knew it when I first came here 10 years ago and went back to Oregon at the time and talked about, when people said, like, what's it like there? And I said, like, I can't really describe it, but there's this feeling of community that I just kind of felt just wrapped in the arms of the community from day one. And we'll never forget it, and it's hard to leave, and it feels like the right time professionally. But I want to thank, and like I said, everyone who has touched this district and my life in pretty profound ways.
Thank you.
Victoria Tempest. While we're all very sad, of course, that you'll be leaving us, I want to thank you for your time here. I think you've done some wonderful things, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. But I think that the rest of the board want to thank you all.
In my career in education, I have never worked with superintendents. And it's going to be a real hard vote to accept resignation. Man,
At least you didn't say no. My rushing through the agenda and almost skipping your resignation does not indicate at all my appreciation for your commitment to this district. And all of your years of hard work and collaboration. It's so defined your tenure.
I've been on the school board longer than anybody here, for sure, at different times, and I was blessed by being on the school board with 2 of the best superintendents, Jim Lombardo, back when we were the building, and I was chair for the 6 years and worked with him, and I've been so fortunate to be on the board with this superintendent. So, with sadness was because I understand totally, it's time to move on to a different place and do well in that place, but it will be tough to replace you as
All right, not everybody can stand.
Somebody's going bad now.
I don't know. There is a motion on the table to accept Peter's resignation. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Seeing none, are there any abstentions?
We'll let you go.
Yes, we'll let you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
You gotta come back and visit one.
I will.
Especially if you're living in
All right, on to our next item, which is a discussion about the superintendent search. I've asked Mary Linder, and is Emily?
Emily might
here if you want me to bring her over.
Yeah, why don't you bring over in case I forget anything and she wants to add something, that would be helpful. So I just want to first reassure you that we are not going to be digging into the worksheets tonight. So if you're thinking like we're going to have another hour and a half of work, that's going to be later. But the worksheets in the board materials were just attached to sort of introduce the process. So just want to give you an update. Emily is the central office contact for Dr. Grotto. I'm the board contact currently. She and I met with Dr. Grotto just to kind of get on the calendar and get discuss and map out a schedule for the stakeholder meetings for the superintendent search. The input that we're going to be trying to gather from the community can be provided either through survey that's currently posted on our website in multiple languages, in person at stakeholder meetings, or in virtual meetings. Per Dr. Grotto's recommendation, the meetings were organized kind of by stakeholder group because he felt, just based on his experience with this process in several other places, that folks tend to feel more comfortable providing their input when they're among their peers. So teachers tend to, feel comfortable talking about the things that they're looking for in a leader, and often it'll prompt another teacher, coming up with something. So he felt like that was the best way to get robust input from stakeholder groups. But even though they're sort of organized that way, we did want to just emphasize that anyone is welcome, anyone from any of the stakeholder subsections of our community is welcome to attend whichever meeting, whichever virtual meeting, in-person meeting works best for them. And all of those processes, whether it's survey, in-person, or virtual, are all basically asking folks the same questions, the same 4 questions, which were provided in the update that Emily sent out in the right update. So the next stakeholder meetings begin this week. On Wednesday, we have 3 virtual ones from 11:15 to 12:15, from 3:30 to 4:30, and from 5 to 6. All of those links have been sent out on emails and are on our website. We have one virtual one on Thursday from noon to 1. We have an in-person one on Monday the 20th from noon to 1, and that's at 208 Charles Ave. And then on Monday the 27th, we have 2 in-persons, one from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock at Mary Hogan School, and one from 6:30 to 7:30, and that is going to be at Shoreham Elementary School. So again, all of that information about gathering input from stakeholder groups has been sent out. District email has been included in all the principals' weekly emails. We have it on our website, so when you go to our website, it's right there with news, and you click on that, it takes you right to the superintendent search landing page. We also had an ad put in the X Independent, and Jeff Flowers was gracious enough to write a short article describing the process and putting the dates in there as well, so thank you, John. We also posted on Front Porch Forum, and we have circulated paper flyers at all the schools, town centers, libraries, post offices, and a couple of key locations like the rec center, the Memorial Sports Center. Joanna, I believe, was going to take some to Rikers and Snowball, and a couple of other just like Pratt's, and I think one of you got Pratt's. So a couple paper locations as well. So I feel like we've got a good distribution, and hopefully we'll get people participating in these because we really want this all input. So then the next step will be after that last stakeholder meeting, Dr. Grotto will be.
I just had a really quick question. Is there an ideal number of participants, or did he give any kind of goals for how many folks to?
I don't recall him providing any specific goals, but as many as possible. And I know they've already held one with ACSD's administrative stakeholders. So we will then be receiving like a written report report of all of the feedback. And then we need to begin our process of identifying our preferred qualifications. So the board meeting that we have scheduled for the 28th of February, right before our annual meeting, is only an hour. We have other business to attend to in that hour. So Dr. Grotto suggested, we need to kind of keep on schedule so that we can move forward with getting our preferred qualifications settled so that we can put together a job posting. So he suggested the very next day, Wednesday, March 1st, having a special board meeting. And I believe Heather will be scheduling that. And at that meeting is when we will receive all the input from the community, and also we'll begin our process. And if you would look through the board materials, there's these 2 worksheets. The first one was one that Ellen sent actually, which was the figuring out the role worksheet. I think this was just a good worksheet to kind of help us individually think about what our preferred qualifications are in a superintendent. So I would encourage us all to just, go through the worksheet, go through the practice of trying to identify things you're looking for in our new leader, and then come with those ideas to the March 1st. And Dr. Grotto will be walking us through the nominal group technique process so that we can get, all of our input as well as the stakeholder input and kind of winnow that down to a good representative job description, if that makes sense. Suzanne?
So as the stakeholders, are the board members supposed to go to any of those meetings, or does Dr. Grotto want the board members to stay out of that and allow the stakeholders to have their own say and then share?
Yeah, so if you all recall when we first had the presentation about Mac and Jake's process, they recommended that board members not show up to those stakeholder meetings so that folks can be completely honest, completely, just say what they want to say without, having board members influence that in any way. And then all of that data will be given to us at our first group gathering. So that's the preference. And obviously, we'll get a very thorough, in addition to all the written surveys, we'll get, he'll be basically transcribing everything that's said, assuming there's no swear words and things like that.
You'll put them in there, I'll just like that.
Right. So it'll be a pretty thorough report.
They do a very comprehensive report of everything that's said, so that every comment is in there.
Right. So a couple things. So the goal obviously is for us to, by the end of the first, have a pretty good feeling of what our preferred qualifications are so that we can construct a good representative job description that reflects both what we want, what the community wants, and so what we're hearing, and try to get that out as soon as possible. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, Laura.
And first, what time did we think that was going to be?
I think just at 5:30.
5:30.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. So Mac and Jake were very specific about board members not attending stakeholder groups. And I think that I would like to make a motion that we agree not to attend the stakeholder group.
I don't think that we need a motion.
I think we do.
Oh, I don't think we can't take action on that, it's not important, right?
Do that.
I don't think we can do that.
I think everybody
We need to
understands.
come and tell us for sure, but I think we don't know what to do.
Right.
Well, we should be promoting them.
We should be promoting them 100%. Yes, you can tell anyone and everyone.
Yes.
To go to the stakeholder meeting, and then we'll get all that information and discuss it at length.
And I do just want to also give Emily an opportunity. Emily, if you are there and listening, if you have anything to add, please jump in.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I I'm cooking for a bunch of 10 and 11-year-old basketball players, so I'm not going to put myself on video. But I would just add that here are the 4 questions that I think Mary Heather referenced are in the survey. Those can be found on that webpage, and those are the same 4 questions that will be asked at every stakeholder engagement meeting. So whether or not you fill out those questions online, or the virtual meetings, or the in-person meetings, there's going to be a lot of consistency there. And I think it would be great to just take a look at those questions beforehand, because I think as admins we had a great conversation, and it's just important for folks to be able to have a sense that no matter which venue they choose to participate in, it'll be the same experience for them. Oh, and also, Mary, I was finding a quiet place, and you were reading over the panelists. Did you mention the student engagement piece as well?
I did not. Do you want to elaborate on that? Thank you for remembering that.
Sure. So we were talking about the best way to engage with students, and oftentimes what's suggested is during their student advisory, and we decided that sometimes that's not the best place for them to actually have the time to actually discuss the questions and really get some thought to the survey. So I talked to our individual society teachers, Karen Martin, and they are actually doing a unit on hierarchies, and they have just mapped the hierarchies in ACSD. So they're actually having this type of discussion right now. And so she has talked to some of her colleagues, and she's going to have this conversation during some of her classes, and the goal is to at least get a variety of students' ages engaged in this discussion and have them fill out that survey after their discussion in class.
Perfect. Perfect. 2 things. So I wanted to go to one of the feedback forums, like just as a normal person in disguise, you know. I won't go. Like I was trying to figure out when I could go. So I'm like, I have to just fill the survey out, and honestly.
You get to be honest for 3 hours on.
Oh wow, how delightful.
And I'm going to bring cheese.
I hope I'll get follow you back to your like that. So, and then another just, Mary Heather, when you were listing the dates, the one on the 15th, what was the later one? I thought it was 6 to 7, but when you were saying it at the time, you said
5 to 6, I believe. And let me just.
It's on the document that I had at the communication and engagement meeting as 6 to 7, so that there's no, on the 15th.
6 to 7, so the annual meeting starts at 7.
Right.
No, that's
The 15th.
the board meeting.
Wednesday, February 15th, 6 to 7, virtual for parents, caregivers, community, unless this is an old.
Website is 5 to 6.
And also there's an email that you sent out this afternoon that Victoria sent out that has the dates on it as well.
Yeah, so on the website, it says 5 to 6.
Okay, so it's not from 6 to 7 on the 15th. It's
Lindsay,
from
I'm
5
not
to
sure
6.
if that copy that you got is an old one or a new one.
Okay.
So let's talk after.
Okay, I just want to make, so it's definitely not 6 to 7, no. Not that I'm going to participate, but just in case somebody asks me.
Direct them to the website.
Okay, 5 to 6 website, excellent.
Mary Heather, one more thing, just in, I think, response to Ellen's question. I remember John saying that they generally have about 200 to 300 people participate in some way. So whether or not that's in the forums or the written feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair?
Yes.
Question regarding the meeting, our next supposedly before the annual meeting and discussion of the budget. Some of that's an executive session, so normally that's not the case, so I don't know, you have to think that out a little bit as to how awkward or unawkward it would be to have an executive session meeting and then have the annual meeting starting right afterwards. So I only make that.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Yep. Love to have that.
And the other thing I'm just going to let the board know is all of the annual meetings this year are like stacked on top of each other. So Mount Aim, the Career Center, and ACSD are all in the same day. So we will be running from the Career Center here. We may not make the meeting before the annual meeting, but we'll be here. Just gonna finish another meeting first.
I'm seeing that the board meeting before the annual meeting is at Charles Ave.
No.
It says on.
Well, I don't know.
ACSD calendar.
Whether you figure that out, and whether we do what you had proposed we do before, maybe before we do
I'll send it
first, I'm just.
Yeah, we'll think about those logistics and I'll send it.
Bringing up some of the potential conflicts, including that 5 o'clock.
Yes, 5 to 7.
Yeah, so like their office. Looks like it's at their office, not at that.
We just have a lot of meetings.
Any other questions around the superintendent search for Mary Heather and Emily? All right, moving on. Policy revision. We have on the docket amending policy C10, the prevention of harassment, hazing, and bullying of students. This is something we've all seen.
It's the second reading. Yep. And the only thing that's different than the previous one is the names of the people that you contact when you want to make a report. It is Vicki Wells' name on it, and we're going to, we amended it so that it says superintendent or designee.
Yeah.
So that's the only changes in everything.
And as a reminder, Mary, this is a boilerplate policy.
It's a boilerplate policy.
Can I get a motion to amend policy C10?
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Policy committee or here or whatever?
Yeah. Did we warn it as an action? Yeah, it's not.
It was warned.
It says in 2017.
It says amend on the. It says amend agenda. On our agenda.
Right.
Yeah, so is that,
That's an action.
Okay, got it. Okay, so
Anybody else? Questions, comments, or Lindsay?
There's a lot in this, it almost reads like a procedure. And so with that in mind, could we add language that requires that the first point of contact would not be a letter or written information? That is there a way to say that a member of the administration or staff would have an actual conversation, whatever like language the person speaks in, before it, or like we go pretty far into the procedure of this. I know it's boilerplate, but
Can you specify what line you're talking
okay,
about?
so all right, so
You're on notice.
all right, I'm on notice.
Is that what you're talking about?
Aye, it's very end.
Hold on, let me find it.
Notice means a written complaint or oral information that hazing, harassment, or bullying may have occurred which have been provided to a designated employee from another employee. The student is allegedly subjected to hazing, harassment, or bullying. Another student, parent, or guardian, or any other
Right, so I guess it would be I.
Isn't that just a definition of what notice is up above?
That's how we define it.
That's how it's defined by law.
That's how it's defined by law, but can we hold ourselves to a higher standard that we talk so much about engagement, that that we hold ourselves to the standard that there's going to be a conversation before a parent receives something.
Right, I think that's just defining what notice means, but the first thing that I see is that we will adopt a procedure directing staff, parents, and guardians how to report violations of the policy and file complaints under the policy. So I think you're just seeing a definition down below, but that doesn't mean that that's the first thing that we're doing. The first thing is that the superintendent or the superintendent or designee will establish a procedure on how to handle it.
Yeah, so up at the top, according to the procedures accompanying this policy, so where are the procedures that accompany the policy?
That's have to be written.
But they already exist, because this was adopted in 2017. And so that's searchable on our website.
Right, but the procedure's not something that we can.
That's by the district.
Right, we don't publish that.
And the board doesn't do
So this, yeah, this
Well,
policy.
we're talking about engagement, and I'm just, it's, yeah. To say something like, there's different languages spoken. So to have like a higher bar to say, you know, that there will be communication in the, you know, the language spoken by the guardian or whatever, you know, prior to action being taken or something. That's the bar that we want to set for the procedure. Okay.
So this is legislated, so the AOE actually, I can't remember if it was 2017 or earlier, it was earlier, both the policy and procedure, which is unusual, are provided to us by the AOE. So this is not something that we should be amending and changing. It's lockstep. We're held to it by the state. If we don't follow this, we're, you know, obviously liable for whatever penalties would come from not following this procedure. So policy and procedure. So my recommendation to not, one, I don't know if we can, and two, the kind of engagement you're talking about and the communication is part of the training that we do with administrators to talk through how do you best work through and make these kinds of experiences learning opportunities for students. How do they build community as opposed to disrupt and tear down community? All those kinds of things are not going to necessarily exist in the policy or procedure. They're going to exist in our implementation. And that's work that we do every year. We talk about this at our leadership retreat and leading up to the start of the year. We onboard new administrators to help them understand how to do this. We're continuing to also try to work with this requirement and not become, which I think is often the case for many, reactive to incidents as opposed to being proactive. And so that is work that we see coming in the next years is you know, you can follow the law and respond to incidents, but really the work is in building culture and prevention.
Yeah, I totally agree. So this is like legislation, that's a little bar.
I'm looking at implementation number 3. Is Nicole our equity coordinator?
Yo, yo, yo.
It says we need to designate, or that here is
We just don't have names in policy because everything.
I can change it.
Oh, okay.
Just like for my own.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? All right, so we have a motion, motion second. So all those in favor of amending C10, prevention of harassment, hazing, and bullying of students, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. Policy passes, and we move on to other. Any other questions?
I didn't abstain officially. I was not here for the minutes, so I just wanted to make a correction. I did not attend the meetings on the 26th or the 30th, and so I should be marked as abstaining from those 2 meetings.
Instead of approving them?
Correct. Right,
Yeah.
right. I don't want to, yeah.
You're not approving those?
I do not approve them, I abstain.
Which dates again?
Yes, I agree, approve the minutes of the 23rd. The 26th and the 30th, I was not here. I did not attend the meeting, so I abstained from the 1/26/23 and 1/30/23 minute vote.
Thank you.
Or whatever.
All right, any other? Seeing none, how about the motion to adjourn? To adjourn. Perfect. We adjourn at 8:43.